Good evening, everyone. My name is Kayla Moore. I am a student at California Baptist University, and the social problem I have chosen to address is age discrimination, better known as ageism. Age discrimination is most commonly known and reported in the workplace. Employers have often seen negative attitudes toward older workers. Age discrimination is something that persists even though older workers are not necessarily less healthy, less educated, less skillful, or less productive than their younger counterparts. This can be more commonly seen in women. Older women face particular challenges in employment because of their age and their sex. Ageism, or age discrimination, most commonly affects applicants and employees over the age of 40. Now, let's dig a little deeper into what age discrimination or ageism actually is. Age discrimination is defined as the denial of privilege or other unfair treatment based on the age of the person who is discriminated against. In the workplace, age discrimination is adverse treatment of an employee based on a specific class or category that they belong to rather than on the employee's individual merit. As mentioned before, this is most common amongst employees 40 years of age and older. Although most common among older adults, younger adults, applicants, and employees can also be victims of age discrimination. Age discrimination involves treating an applicant or employee less favorably because of his or her age. Ageism or age discrimination can occur even if the applicant or employee is unaware. Is ageism or age discrimination a social problem? A social problem is any condition or behavior that has negative consequences for large numbers of people and that is generally recognized as a condition or behavior that needs to be addressed. Approximately 40 million Americans are age 65 and over. In America, they represent 29% of the population. Despite these figures and the fact that everyone ages, society and the media value youth and both influence and reinforce negative attitudes toward unfair prejudices against aging and older adults. In a society where youth and its milestones are glorified, aging is belittled and generally portrayed as a path leading to senility, frailty, and dependence. It is no surprise that ageism exists. In the field of sociology, we talk a lot about prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is an attitude that can lead to negative judgments of people because of their social characteristics. Discrimination, on the other hand, is the negative treatment of individuals because of their social location. I'd like to bring your attention to the problem of ageism, a particular type of prejudice and discrimination primarily targeted at older adults. Like racism and sexism, ageism serves a social and economic purpose, that is, to legitimize and sustain inequalities between groups. It's not about how we look, it's about how people in power assign meaning to how we look. Ageism, like racism and sexism, is bigotry. In other words, it is intolerable and it must be combated. There are several effects of age discrimination. The first I would like to discuss is how age discrimination can affect people socially, more specifically, our elderly. Ageism is a serious form of social discrimination and has a severe effect on the self esteem and well being of our seniors. Ageism forces the elderly into their own separate group, making them feel isolated from the rest of society. The elderly are the predominant victims of ageism and are burdened with the negative effects. Stereotypes about age are ingrained in us during youth and are further reinforced by society and the media. Because of these values that our culture has placed on us, we leave our elderly to feel like they don't belong, to feel like they are no longer an effective people and integral parts of our society. These untrue and unnecessary stereotypes have resulted in the unequal treatment of our elderly. This unequal treatment can be associated with the elderly being refused certain rights and privileges in our society that are willingly given to younger people. Researchers have found that there can be heavy psychological effects of age discrimination on our elderly. Because we live in a society that values and endorses youth, the cultural influences have forced the elderly people to hide their age through expensive fashion and cosmetic surgery. This is due to the lower body esteem that is associated with age discrimination. Age discrimination is damaging to the psychological health of our elderly, also because the elderly are now starting to avoid these stereotypes about being old by resorting to drugs and alcohol use as an escape. We are now seeing more elderly people who are dissatisfied with life and depressed. Because of this dissatisfaction and depression, the elderly are now becoming bitter and have begun to withdraw from society, having no time for family, making no attempts at interpersonal relationships. As our elderly suffer mental illnesses such as depression due to the age discrimination and the harm that it has caused psychologically, this depression has caused occurrences of suicidal thoughts. Age discrimination or ageism has had very heavy effects having to do with economics on our elderly. A reduction in elderly income has led to a reduction in consumption. The elderly are often laid off for younger employees with less compensation. This means they are either forced into early retirement, having to file for Social Security, or having to rely on their younger family members. Due to age discrimination, the elderly get hired for lower positions and less compensation, even though they may be overqualified. They are forced into these jobs as the younger employees are being pushed in by employers. The younger employees seem to be more desirable. In these many attempts to make way and make room for younger employees, older employees are pressed to retire even at the prime of their careers. All of the above mentioned effects, as far as economy is involved, leave our elderly feeling less productive in our society. So, what are the causes and contributing factors of age discrimination? Various factors contribute to ageism in American culture. As I mentioned earlier, youth, beauty, and vitality are highly valued by Americans. Because of this, the aging process is viewed as counter to these highly valued attributes. Good health is also something that is valued by Americans. One of the most common stereotypes about aging is that it brings the loss of good health, which makes many fear the aging process. Of course, the real fear is that aging leads to death. Putting distance between oneself and aging thus eases the fear of dying. Researchers have found that the stereotypes about ageism are founded on these three key issues. Succession, the idea that older adults should move aside from high paying jobs and prominent social roles to make way for younger adults. Identity, the idea that older people should not attempt to act or look younger than they are. Consumption, the idea that seniors should not consume so many scarce resources, such as healthcare. Many people might conclude that it is younger adults that come up with these prescriptive stereotypes. Sadly, while elders are still valued in many other countries, American culture seems to have lost this attitude. Ageism has become ingrained in American culture as it is passed on to children from parents who hold ageist stereotypes. The same ageist myths and misconceptions that are held by adults are also being adopted by teens and children. Americans make jokes and comments about growing old that perpetuate negative stereotypes about aging and older people. Things like old fart, old geezer, and diaper butt are terms that portray older people in a negative light. The mass media, the labor market, government programs, and even the healthcare systems all perpetuate ageist attitudes in dealing with older patients and elderly citizens. As we learn more about the heinous ordeal that is ageism, one ponders and wonders about the consequences of such discrimination. Ageism has consequences far beyond the workplace. A large percentage of older people who say they have been victims of ageism share their experience continues to scar their lives. In a report from Maturity Works, an astonishing 71% admitted that ageism affected their mental well being, and almost 1 in 3 believed it had affected their marriages and other interpersonal relationships. Moreover, the report reveals that ageism now affects people even as young as 35. Maturity Works interviewed 150 people in April to investigate the social impact of workplace ageism. Of the victims of ageism, 65% were not confident in getting another job. 83% believed they had been denied employment on grounds of age, and 71% admitted to being anxious about the future. Older workers see themselves as targets for redundancy and feel frustrated and resentful that their valuable skills are not being appreciated and are going to waste. Ageism has created a society where the golden years are becoming years of frustration, depression, anxiety, and resentment. A community of mature workers is being created who are scarred by an experience that stays with them forever. It seems extraordinary that such a large pool of available talent is going to waste due to this ignorance that is being displayed by our society. Many people, like myself, who become frustrated after learning about this type of discrimination may wonder, how is this particular issue being presented to the public? Right now, aging simply isn't an issue Americans are thinking about as a matter that requires a public response. This fact reveals a serious risk of policy inactivity, or worse, rollbacks of existing policies. Unless the field of advocates who care about aging issues cultivates a more visible, more informed conversation on older people, it will remain difficult to advance the systematic changes needed to adjust to a society of tolerance. In other words, society needs to start wrapping their minds around the fact that this is an inevitable stage of life. America is in need of an aging attitude adjustment. Research shows that aging is misunderstood in America and that the misperceptions create obstacles to productive practices and policies. To change the dynamic of ignorance in our society, fields and organizations that deal with aging needs need to bring forth a set of standards that creates the shifts in public understanding essential to building the political will to create a more age-integrated society. Aging fields and organizations aim to move age discrimination onto the public agenda as a policy issue. The objective is to elevate awareness that age discrimination exists and that it can be addressed through sound policies and practices. Policymakers, legislation, healthcare providers, and employers have the means to introduce the topic of ageism to the American public that appeal to broad constituencies and point to public solutions. So, how do we fix the problem? Ageism and age discrimination is about attitude, and attitudes can change with the proper education, familiarity, and understanding. There are things that both professionals and average people can do to combat the issue of ageism. Physicians must be aware of the special needs of the elderly and encourage active patient participation. Doctors also need to realize that all symptoms or physical complaints should not and cannot be addressed as issues separate from the aging process. Should be addressed as issues separate from the aging process. Parents and family caregivers of all types need to encourage and promote positive attitudes toward aging to children in their homes. All citizens in our society need to be sure to ignore negative stereotypes, take initiatives in learning more about the aging process, speak out against ageism, avoid using demeaning labels, and encourage bridging the generation gap at both home and in the workplace. The time has come for us to change how we view aging in this country. Remember, it is an inevitable stage of life. It is up to us to make a difference now.